In this last video, before we make our app at the end of this section, we're going to look at classes in a little bit more detail. So we've seen them popping up every now and again, but we haven't really created our own and seen what they can do. Now they're very powerful things, so I'm going to show you what we can do with them in this video. So just going to create a new program for us, and we'll call it classes. Okay, so as I've mentioned before, a class is kind of a template or a blueprint for an object that we could create several times in a program. Now that's the sort of thing that doesn't make a lot of sense until you put it into context. So let's say, for example, we've got a game that we're programming, and in this game there are several users of the game. Then it might be useful to create a class called user. Notice classes generally have a capital letter at the beginning of them, unlike variables. So we could create our user class. And within this user class, we might have some variables and we might have some methods that apply to the user class. So for example, we might have a variable score, which represents the score that that particular user has got so far in the game. Now, how would we access that outside of the class? Well, first of all, we'd have to create a particular user. So we would do that by first defining the type of the object that we're creating, which is a user. So it's not a string or an int or any of the other types that we've seen so far. It's a user, and we might call the user Bob. So this is a particular user, Bob, that we're creating here. And he is going to be a new user. So we've seen this kind of construct as well, but now we're using it with our very own code. So we've created a class of user, which has a score variable within it. And then we've created a specific instance or object with that type, and that's Bob. And that is a type of user. So then if we want to set Bob's score, then we would say Bob.score is equal to, and then whatever, 10, let's say. Then if we wanted to display that or use it somewhere, we'd just do it in the same way. So system out print ln Bob.score. And then we run that and we get the score of 10. So you can see what we're doing is quite similar to what we've done before. And to be honest, I won't be able to convince you that you should always write your code like this rather than just having a variable called score and setting it equal to 10. But you might be able to see that this is quite a convenient way to set up your code. And it really helps when you start building big libraries of code, that when you've got all the logic of the user together in one place rather than spread out all over the place, then it's much easier to maintain and keep control over. So let's see how else we might use this. Let's say that in our game, we've decided that when you get to 100 points, you win the game. And we want to check whether a user has won the game or not. Then we could create a method within our user class that's going to return true or false depending on whether the user has won the game, whether they've got 100 points or more. So we'd do that by creating a public method, public so that we can create it from anywhere. Now we're used to using void because we usually return nothing, but this time we're going to return true or false depending whether or not the user has won the game. So instead of void, we're going to return a boolean, a true or false. And then we'll call the method has won, and parentheses because it's a method, but it doesn't need to take any variables. And then we can do a check if score is greater or equal to 100, then we're going to return true. So that means we're going to return the value true to where the method was called in the first place. And if it's not, we're going to return false. There we go, because the user hasn't won yet. Now, how do we use that down here? Well, the obvious thing would be to just change this to bob.hasWon. And then because it's a method rather than a variable, we need parentheses afterwards. So this will run the hasWon method on Bob, which will then go up here, look for hasWon, then check if Bob's score is greater than or equal to 100. If it is, return true. If it's not, return false. So let's take a look and see what that returns. As we would expect, it returns false. And let's just check. If we suddenly give Bob 200 points, then it returns true, as we would expect. So that means if I want to suddenly change the winning score of the game, then I change it here in the user class with all the other user information and logic and data, which makes a lot more sense. So once again, we could of course write this code in a simpler way and a way that works for this level of program, but hopefully you can see that this would be a useful construction and a useful way to write a larger program to make it more maintainable and more logical in terms of its layout and structure. So here's your challenge. Can you create a class of number, and then that number class, I want to have an integer value associated with it, which could either be positive or negative, so greater than 0 or less than 0. And I want an isPositive method, which will return true if the number of the object is positive and false if it's not. And that will be just a good test to see if you've got the idea of what these classes are doing. If not, don't worry, it is a complicated and quite tricky concept. So if you want to watch me do it, then that's absolutely fine. Best of luck though. Okay, hope you managed that one. I would do something like this. So class of number with a capital N for our class definitions. And then we're going to have an integer, which I'll just call number with a lowercase n. And then we're going to have a public method, which again is going to return a Boolean. And we're going to call it isPositive, pair of parentheses, because it's a method but it's not receiving anything, so we don't need to put any variables in there. And then we just do a check if number is greater than 0, return true, else return false. There we go. So that's our class. We're done. Let's just create a new instance of it, an object, just to make sure that everything's as we would expect. So we're creating a new number. I'll call it my number. And that's a new number, as we've seen. And then I'll just set that number. So my number dot number, I'm going to set equal to 7, which is of course a positive number, so I'm expecting a true result here. And then I'm actually going to use an if statement, and I'm going to use my number dot isPositive as the test for that if statement. Because this is a Boolean, I can just put it straight into an if statement, and if it's true, then my if statement passes as true. And then I'm going to be a bit fancy, and rather than just printing true or false to the console, I'm going to use system.out and print ln, and I'm going to get my number dot number plus is positive. There we go. And else so in this case it's not positive. So my number dot number is not positive. If you're being really precise here, be careful about saying my number dot number is negative, because it could of course be 0, which generally speaking is accepted to be neither positive nor negative. But I won't take marks off if you put negative there. Okay, that's it. Of course, the important thing here is what we're doing here. So we're creating a new object called myNumber of a type number, and then we're setting the number variable within that to 7, and then we're doing the test for is positive, and if it is, we're saying that it's positive. If it's not, it's saying that it's not positive. So let's just check that. I've got an error in there. Did you see that coming? I forgot to put my pair of brackets after is positive, because this of course is a method, not a variable, so it needs an open and close pair of parentheses. There we go. 7 is positive. If I change it to -7, we get -7 is not positive. There we go. So I hope that's helped clarify a little bit of what a class is, what an object is, and how we might use classes in our code. In the next video, we're going to create the second and final app of this section, and I'm going to encourage you to do it in an object-oriented way. So that is using classes and objects. I'll see you there.